Hi, Ken Goodman here with another teardown of a cheap consumer product. Today I'm going to show you remote control for my smart TV that stopped working not too long ago. I had to buy another one because I couldn't wait to get it fixed. You know, with these smart TVs and a lot of modern gizmos, you can't operate the device without the remote control. So it kind of raises the question, at least in my mind, of why fix it? Why bother fixing some cheap consumer device like this? I was guessing that I could probably get another remote for this TV for something like 10 bucks. And I probably could have if I had shopped around a little more. But I went online and ordered one, got it in a couple of days. But it cost me about 25 bucks, more than I thought. Still, that's not very much money when you compare it to, an hour or two fiddling with some product like that, trying to fix it. Of course, it's one less piece of plastic in the landfill, one less potentially toxic circuit board in a landfill somewhere. So there's that. There's also the fact that you may really be fond of that particular gizmo. I know this remote control that failed certainly feels better in my hand than the replacement remote. The buttons work better and that sort of thing, at least when it worked. And sometimes it's good to have a backup. But for me, the biggest reason to take apart and possibly repair some cheap device like this is curiosity. And there's a pretty good chance I will learn something anytime I tear down a product like this, figure out exactly how it failed, figure out what it takes to repair it, and that might just increase my general knowledge of the world. It might help me down the road when I'm designing some product of my own. So let's take a look at this particular remote. The first thing is inexpensive devices with plastic housings like this, and housings that snap together with minimum of fasteners and that sort of thing. The first step is always trying to get into them without totally destroying the enclosure they're in. In this case, it's pretty typical. These products are not really meant to be taken apart. There are better tools for taking apart snap together housings like this than what I used here, but you can see I'm just using a little flathead screwdriver with a very fine point to probe the part where the two main halves of the housing come together, and try to find the points where the latching features exist, and spread the edge of the housing a little bit and until that snap comes apart. Actually, there were 4 screws in this housing, and the reason for that is really just to hold the circuit board inside tight against the battery holder. So those 4 screws come out first. and then you snap the housing apart, maybe scar it up a little bit along the seam, but it'll go back together and it'll stay together. So open up this remote, and of course I'm hoping I'll find something really quick and easy to fix. And I got excited when I first looked at it and I saw some contamination on the switches that make up the keypad. You can see the switches are these cone-like structures with conductive fingers that are interlaced. They don't quite touch, and then a conductive button comes down. When you press the button, a little conductive pill comes down and bridges the gap and closes the circuit. And that's what some processor somewhere is sensing to say, oh, he pressed the up channel switch. So I opened up the device and I saw it had these conductive carbon paint switches printed on it. And it looked like there was some kind of film over some of those, which looked like dried sweet tea. That's probably exactly what it was. I'm a big sweet tea drinker. So I thought, I'll just clean it off with alcohol and put it back together and it will work. Well, no. I cleaned it up, put it back together, still didn't work. Pretty annoying. Okay, so let's take it apart a second time. Then you have to start looking at the circuit board and try to figure out details of how the thing works. And in this case, I had to get out my meter and start checking continuity. You can see there's a little custom microcontroller chip down here at one end of the circuit board. That's about all there is on the board. Processor, keypad switches, copper traces connecting a lot of it together. But on this single-sided board, they're using this printed conductive ink to form the switches, so to save money, they actually used a single-sided circuit board and used that same conductive ink or conductive paint to make some jumpers to complete the circuit in a lot of different places. So when I started probing around with my multimeter, checking resistance in the circuit, I found out that there were some places on the circuit board where a copper trace came to a pad that was covered with the conductive ink that's supposed to complete the circuit. And there were a few places on the board where that connection had gone bad between the copper pad and the conductive ink. So I decided to use some conductive ink to make the repair, to connect from the copper pad to the existing conductive ink circuit and switches. And that's what I did. And originally I thought I was going to mix up some of my own conductive ink, just using carbon and glue. And I looked up several recipes for doing that online and tried a couple. Found something that would probably have worked, but also found a kind of nifty ready-made conductive ink, and it turns out to be pretty sporty. We'll talk more about the the homemade conductive inks at the end of this video, but it turns out the commercial product has a much lower resistance than what I mixed up at my house here. So I went ahead and used that. Repaired a few of those failed junctions with the conductive ink, let it dry pretty well, reassembled the remote, tested it out, works fine. So that's pretty much it, though it took a couple of attempts. I did get this simple device working again, and now I have my old comfortable remote back in my hand when I'm vegging out in front of the smart TV. Let's talk about the construction of the circuit board, and then we'll talk about homemade conductive inks. This circuit board, you can see, as I mentioned before, it's got a lot of conductive ink on it. Conductive ink forming the switch patterns on the circuit board, and conductive ink making jumpers on the circuit board so they wouldn't have to have traces on the other side of the board, so they could use a really dirt cheap single-sided phenolic circuit board. We could also talk about why they use this carbon-based conductive ink to form the switches. On some boards you'll find they use gold plating on those the fingers of that comb in the switch patterns. Typically, as they do here, they'll use a rubber pill that's got carbon embedded in it to make it conductive, to come down and touch those gold-plated contacts. Here they're using carbon-based conductive ink instead of the gold plating, and you can't just use copper or even solder-coated copper, tinned copper, because over time it will develop an oxide film and the switches will become unreliable. Sometimes they do use, especially when they're using a flexible board, as in a membrane switch, they'll use a silver-based conductive ink. And let's talk about do-it-yourself conductive inks. In the process of making this repair and thinking about this video, I looked at quite a few recipes online for making conductive inks at home. And a lot of those recipes suggested using charcoal. Don't do it. I tried some powdered activated charcoal. It's very convenient, but when you mix it with glue as a binder and paint it on some surface and let it dry and measure the resistance, it's way up in the megohms. I did the same thing with a charcoal briquette. You can grind that up to make a powder, but even if you just check the charcoal briquette itself with a meter, you're going to find that it's way up in the megohms even when it's compressed into a brick. So what did I use? Hey, look, if you take a number 2 pencil with graphite pencil lead and probe it with a meter, you may find something like 50 ohms over the over say an inch length of number 2 pencil lead in a typical school or office pencil. So file that stuff into a powder, mix it with a little clear Elmer's school glue, and it makes a pretty nice conductive paint. The commercial product has about 4 times more conductivity apparently than my homemade goo. A lot of recipes call for lamp black, which is basically soot, which is basically amorphous carbon powder. I didn't actually make anything with carbon black, so I'm kind of speculating that it works well. Okay, so I used graphite from a pencil lead to make my conductive ink. That works pretty well. You can go to the hardware store and buy some lock lubricant, some powdered lubricant that's supposed to be graphite. It'll say graphite on the label. You can't trust that. Got some of that and looked at it under the microscope, and it's some flaky material which appeared to be possibly partly graphite and partly mica or something like that. I haven't really, been able to analyze it to figure out what's in it, but don't try to use it for conductive ink. My advice, if you want to make some conductive ink from readily available materials at home, my advice is pencil lead, graphite from a pencil lead, filed. Please use a steel file and not an emery board. You don't want to get other materials mixed in with the graphite. So use a steel file, clean off the surface of the file with alcohol or something before you start, to keep from getting oils mixed in with your powder. But just file down some pencil lead, make a nice powder from that, mix it with something like clear Elmer's school glue as a binder, store it in an airtight container until you need it. So that's enough arts and crafts fun for now, but I hope some of you will join me in tearing down failed electronic gizmos, figuring out why they failed, and maybe even fixing them now and then. Win some, you lose some. This one worked out well. Take care. Good day.